Remember, remember, the 5th of November, the Gunpowder Treason and plot. I know of no reason that the Gunpowder Treason should ever be forgot. On the morning of November 5th, 1605, a man named Guy Fawkes was found in the basement of the Palace of Westminster with 36 barrels of gunpowder in an attempt to assassinate King James by blowing up Parliament to try and save his fellow Catholics from Protestant persecution. Now, when you first hear this story, you probably are wondering, why did Guy Fawkes want to do this? What do you mean by Catholic persecution or Protestant persecution of Catholics? What was going on at that time? What would make a man want to take 36 barrels of gunpowder and try to assassinate the King of England? It confused me and it mind boggled me for a minute until, I said, you know what? I'm going to go do deep research into this and see what exactly happened on that day. Well, when I first went in there, I found out this was more than just a gunpowder treason and plot. But in order for us to really understand where the Catholic Protestant Christian persecution came from, we would have to go back to the reign of King Henry VIII. Now, I'm not going to really go too much into detail of who King Henry VIII was, but let's just say he was the type of guy who just wanted a son, and his 9 different wives, who he divorced and beheaded, at least 8 of them, would not give him an heir to the throne, which basically he wanted a son. At first, England was actually part of the Holy Roman Empire, really part of the Holy Roman Catholic Church. It was the people around in England during this time were majority Catholics. Kind of a double-edged sword. A lot of the poor in England didn't even know how to speak Latin nor read it. They needed a priest in order for them to really understand the words of the Bible. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In 1534, King Henry wanted to be separated from his wife at the time, which was Catherine of Aragon, who couldn't bear him a son. He wanted a divorce from her. Well, the Catholic Church wasn't going to recognize it. He had already been divorced 4 or 5 different times before this, and they were starting to kind of, get tired of him abusing his kingship powers of being able to divorce. People at this time weren't able to divorce like that. They had to either stick through it until death, or you had to be that high up to know the Pope in order for you to get an annulment. And most annulments at this time, if you were caught being an adulterer, might lead to death. So getting a divorce at this time was life or death at this point. It wasn't just go to a lawyer, y'all get separated, and y'all go y'all separate ways. No, this one with marriage, it was taken very seriously. If you get married, it's to death do y'all part. But King Henry thought he was above this, so he wanted to get a divorce. Well, when this happened, he separated completely from the Catholic Church, and England became majority Protestant. And the only reason that he did this was because he just wanted a divorce and he just wanted a son. And the Catholic Church was not going to give him that divorce. So, in a petty response, King Henry would pass many reforms trying to convert the people from Catholic to Christians, or Protestant Christians, if I want to be, correct. He would pass many reforms. And in these reforms, he would it would start off as just banning of the practice of being a Catholic, or fining them, or in jailing some people for hiding a priest, or doing, any number of things, almost how the Nazis would do with the Jews during the oppression of them from the 1930s all the way to 1945. It is kind of almost the same thing. Just constantly passing things to keep one group oppressed while trying to promote another. He kept doing this until his death on January 28th, 1547. But even at this point, the Catholics were all in hiding. They stayed in hiding. They were afraid of what was going to happen because a lot of them were being jailed and fined. And a lot of the Catholics were in the upper part of it, or the upper parts of society, but the poorer ones were the ones that really converted first. When King Henry died in January 28th, 1547, Mary I of England came into power in 1553 of July. She was also known as Bloody Mary. And the reason that they called her Bloody Mary is because, well, she did execute 300 Protestant Christians for the persecution of the Catholic people. Mary the First was a very devout Catholic woman. She wanted to try and help save her people and try to, put England back in the good terms with the Catholic Church and the Pope. She would try to work vigorously. She would try her hardest to reverse all of the reforms in which her father had put into place. This gave a lot of the Catholic people in England hope. Hope that, they would return back to the Catholic religion and hopefully that this persecution would end. I mean, they had no problem with England being half Protestant, half Catholic. It was only the head, the elites, the nobles, or I guess you could say, the higher ups. They wanted one side or the other. It couldn't be, we could all just be unified. It was always, no, one side had to be more dominant than the other. And when the other side was more dominant, the other side wanted more power. It just was a power struggle inside of the English Parliament. And the ultimate decider of who had more power was always the king. Either one was going to be Protestant and one was always going to be Catholic. As much change and as much hope as Mary the First of England gave the Catholic people, it was all dashed. Because on November 17th, 1558, due to the complications of the flu, Mary the First of England would pass away. That struck a massive blow to the hopes of Catholic believers, because now Elizabeth I came into power, and she had no intentions on reversing any of the reforms King Henry had placed. In fact, she would make sure that these reforms and these laws were being followed according to how they were written. And by that, I mean she would pass many more laws banning the Catholic religion, period, the practice of it, and even the priests. She banned them from holding services in churches or anywhere. If you were a priest and caught, you could have been executed. That's how strict these laws were. Now, some of these laws were just pay the fine and you would avoid death, but eventually you would run out of funds. I mean, yeah, you could have a lot of money, but these fines were so heavy that eventually you were going to run out and you were going to eventually have to sell your estate. And that was the goal of some of these elites, was to try to take the lands of the Catholic people or the Catholic elites. Now, it wasn't very hard for the poor to convert. I mean, because a lot of them didn't even know Latin in the first place. And so choosing an English written Bible compared to a Latin written Bible kind of wasn't very hard. Plus, they didn't have the money to pay these fines. So converting was the easiest thing for them to do. It was the more rich and powerful Catholics that were having the issue with these laws. In 1558, Elizabeth I would eventually pass a law that everybody had to convert to Protestant Christianity. And that's the difference between, having to just pay fines for practicing it and having a straight conversion of it. Because now it's basically saying there is no Catholic religion here. Protestant Christianity is the dominant religion, and if you don't follow it, well, just like I just said, it's either pay the money or die. But as easy as, you could follow it, you always have those people that just weren't going to do it. And those people were called recusants. And that comes from the Latin term of refusing. Go figure. That's just how petty Elizabeth I was and how petty the English people were. They would use the Latin term to define people refusing to submit. Now listen to this. A recusant, by definition, is a person who refuses to submit to an authority or comply with a regulation. Just like how today, where people are wanting to take the vaccine, don't take the vaccine, they call you an anti-vaxxer if you don't want to take it. And most people don't understand that being an anti-vaxxer is you don't believe in any vaccines. But with the COVID vaccine, everybody wants to include you in that, even though you don't believe in taking an experimental drug that has not any type of, testing or, years worth of research done on it. No, they just want you to take it. They would call you a recusant back in the day. Just like they call you an anti-vaxxer today. So that kind of gives you an idea of what was going on in this time. So people were converting easily because either they didn't want to be fined or they didn't want to be persecuted. It's still not right. You should be able to practice what you want. You should be able to believe in any religion, have any belief, and there should be no persecution. Everybody should be able to live in peace as long as nobody's messing with anybody. It should be a peaceful time. But this is the 16th century, so kind of don't have that type of tolerance. However, many of the Catholics in England would just try to bide their time until Elizabeth I passed away, because they knew the next person in line was Mary I, Queen of Scots. However, those hopes were dashed when Elizabeth I had Mary I, Queen of Scots, executed for treason. And even in that trial, it was kind of confusing on why she did this. And this is just my theory on it, is that when you do things like this, when you persecute a certain religion because you think that there's going to be treasons or, assassinations or plots or anything of that nature, you tend to get very paranoid of this one group. When you have that, it's going to cause rebellion. It's going to cause people to want to make changes because they're tired of seeing their loved ones getting killed. So this whole accusation of Mary I, Queen of Scots, being treasonous seemed more like a power move of Elizabeth I to quell the rebellions and to stop all their hope of thinking that they can have an uprising and place Mary I, Queen of Scots, on the throne. And there's also, birthright issues with this. So a lot of this isn't treason. It's more of a power move that Elizabeth I made in order for her to maintain power or maintain her queenship over England. On March 24th, 1603, Queen Elizabeth died. And she died of unknown circumstances because she didn't give anybody permission to exhume her body. So nobody really knew how she died. Some people say it was a heart attack. Some people say it was poison. But it will always be left as a mystery because she did not allow anybody to look into on how she died. Or England's keeping it a secret. Who knows? That is when King James ascended to the throne. And he was a quote-unquote Catholic. The king made many promises to stop the persecution of the Catholic people and to try to unify the people, not in Catholicism or in Protestant Christianity, but to try to stop, all this and try to unify the people. And many of the Catholic elites believed him. Many of the Catholic people really truly believed that King James was really going to stop this. And for a year, it actually stopped. The persecution stopped, the fines stopped, the hunting of priests stopped. Yeah, during this time in Elizabeth I's reign, she would have actual hunters of priests go out and hunt priests in your homes. And if you were found with one, you were executed. Yeah, for a year, it seemed like it was going to stop. But once King James was coronated and he was finally crowned the King of England, all of those hopes were just gone. He broke all of his promises. In fact, he would pass more reforms and let it be known that he is not going to reverse any of the Catholic persecution laws. And he was going to make sure that everybody was going to convert to Protestant Christianity or leave England. This, to a select few, was the last straw. And for these few, they knew it was time for a revolution. And what I'm talking about is the Gunpowder Treason and plot. The men that planned this whole November the 5th Gunpowder Treason and plot. These conspirators were Robert Catesby, John and Christopher White, Robert and Thomas Wintour, Thomas Percy, Guy Fawkes, and Robert Keyes, just to name a select few. There were many more that came on through the time, and there were many more that joined later on in the plot. But these are the main ones that kind of played a big role in this whole thing. To give a little backstory on all these men, they were all devout Catholics. And some even participated in previous Catholic rebellions. And yeah, there were a few of them that happened during the time of Elizabeth I's reign. And it actually led into Elizabeth I in 1580 being excommunicated. This is how bad it was getting between the Catholic Church and England, that Elizabeth I was excommunicated because she refused to convert back to the Catholic religion. She wanted to stick to the Protestant Christianity. Even Thomas Wintour even tried to get the King of Spain, Philip III, to join in on the plot and actually help try to eliminate King James because he believed that this would benefit Spain. But King Philip III knew that this was no benefit to them whatsoever, so he politely and gently refused. But think about that for a second. This man, Thomas Wintour, he was able to get a meeting with the King of Spain. Let's let that ponder for a minute. How in the hell are you able to get a meeting with the king? How elite are you? How up there are you to get a meeting with the king? But it doesn't stop there. These men would actually get meetings with the Pope as well. Now, in order for you to get a meeting with the Pope, you have to be up there. You have to know people in order for you to really get these meetings. There's no way that these kings and the Pope are going to meet the common folk just randomly. I don't see it. They may do, town halls. They may go out and, just introduce themselves to the people, but to get a private meeting, I don't know. It just seems a little bit shady to me to think that a common man can just get a regular meeting with the king, and especially one that involves plotting against another country. That to me is kind of fugazi as can be. Ultimately, after the two refusals of the Pope and King Philip III, in early 1605, the idea of the Gunpowder Treason was set. At first, the plan was to rent a building next door to Parliament and to dig a tunnel underneath Parliament and set all the gunpowder there and blow it up from there. But after about 6 weeks of digging, all they had to show for it was just a wet tunnel. And the problem with the wet tunnel with gunpowder back in the day is that the gunpowder would get wet or the fuse would get wet and there would be no way for you to light. It would just be a waste of having this gunpowder down there. Doing this whole plot ran into a lot of snags, which is the first red flag for me of, okay, this seems a little bit off, but okay. Many of the conspirators at this point were starting to lose hope. They really started to believe that maybe this isn't going to happen. We need a miracle for us to even pull this off. And a miracle did happen. The vault underneath Parliament was made vacant, making it easier to blow it up and to keep the gunpowder dry. Guy Fawkes and the conspirators would go and rent this room out. But it was just a little confusing when I did a little bit more deeper research on why did this vault underneath Parliament. And if y'all don't know what Parliament is, it's where all of the nobles and the elites go and meet with the king to discuss laws and things that go throughout England. This is a very valuable place. It's kind of like the House of Representatives that we have over here in America. And they just found out that it was vacant. So when I found out who gives the vacancies, I found out that the Earl of Salisbury, Robert Cecile, made it vacant on purpose. Now, that's just a little weird to me. And to give you a backstory on who Robert Cecil is, he was basically the Defense Secretary of Domestic Affairs in England. So basically, he would spy on the people and try to find the Catholic conspirators throughout England. And he would do this using very, very horrendous ways. He would spy on people, he would torture them, and he would blackmail people just to get information on any type of Catholic conspiracy that they had in England. And then that's when I found out he knew. There was no way that he didn't know that this plot was going down. Many believe, including myself, believe that he helped orchestrate this plot. But not because he wanted to blow up the Parliament himself, but because he wanted to improve his own career. He wanted to try to ascend himself in the upper elites. And he also wanted to stir up hatred and suspicion of the Catholics. Now that I can believe he did. To ascend yourself, to put yourself higher in the hierarchy of society in England, in the social classes as well. But also to stir up more hatred toward these people. Yeah, that's more of a believable reason than just Catholic fanatics. He, and what I mean by Robert Cecil, was the primary reason that the vault underneath Parliament was left vacant. He knew that Guy Fawkes and the conspirators needed a place to put the gunpowder in order for the Gunpowder Treason to go through. Hell, even Thomas Percy was starting to get cold feet, and he tried to even confess to Robert Cecil. But Robert, knowing that he was going to confess the whole plot, knew he couldn't meet with this man. Because if he confessed it, that means he had to stop it before, his grand saving of the king. I wish I could find a better term for it, but yeah, all he wanted to do was make sure that this plot went through to make himself look good. Man, that is something. To want to confess on your whole conspiracy and the guy doesn't even want to meet you, to me that would raise red flags and I think I would back out. I mean, this made it look too easy. On the morning of November 5th, 1605, the king received a letter from Robert Cecil warning him of the plot. On that same morning, Guy Fawkes was captured in the vault with 36 barrels of gunpowder, a match, and a lantern. Now, you're probably wondering too, and I probably should have answered this a little bit earlier, who is Guy Fawkes? Where did he even come from? Well, to answer that, there's really hardly any information about this man out there. It's like they're trying to hide this man's name purposely. But, historians today are very good at finding information, and this is about the small amount of information that I have. Why was Guy Fawkes picked to blow up Parliament? Well, because he was a demolition expert. He was actually the gunpowder connection as well. He had access to someone in the market who can be able to sneak them gunpowder, but they had to sneak it via the handfuls. So they had to do this for months on end, meeting at random spots, because you can't just walk around with barrels and barrels of gunpowder, because then that would raise suspicion. But it wasn't suspicious for you to get at least a barrel of gunpowder, because, if you were a merchant, shipman, you would need it. You would need it for your cannons, you would need it for your guns, because at this time there was hardly any navy or any type of police that could patrol the waters like that. And there were very many pirates that patrolled the waters to steal your stuff. So many of the common man during this time had their own type of cannons, and they had to supply themselves with their own gunpowder. So getting gunpowder was not very uncommon. It was just getting a lot of it at once that made it kind of a little bit suspicious. To give a little backstory on who Guy Fawkes was, besides him being able to sneak gunpowder and getting, connections like that, we don't have an actual date of Guy Fawkes' birth. But we do know that he was born in the year of 1570. Guy Fawkes' father actually died before he was when he was 8 years old. He was baptized secretly at the St. Michael's le Belfort Church in England. Now, why secretly? Well, because during the time you could not have baptisms, Catholic baptisms at least, and so everything has to be done in secret. In fact, everything involving being a Catholic in England during this time, you had to do in secret. He actually did have a son named Thomas Fawkes. Now, I did not do research on him, and I should probably do more research to see where his son went. The crazy thing about Guy Fawkes is he actually served in the 80 Years' War. He was described as basically the perfect soldier. Now, the 80 Years' War, I'm going to do in a future episode, so stay tuned for that one. But Guy Fawkes, like the other conspirators, felt that it was time for change and to fight for the eternal afterlife. And I mean that in a serious extent. The Catholic people, if you were a Catholic at this time, you were very devout, especially in the upper elites. That's why it made it so hard, is because they truly believed that if they did convert, they were eternally going to be damned to hell. It's just how strongly they believed in their own religion. When Guy Fawkes was taken to court and asked if he had any regrets, Fawkes would say, "My only regret was that my plot failed." Robert Cecile, and if I'm butchering his name, I don't care. The way I've researched who this guy was a literal bad dude. I don't want to be vulgar, but the guy was not a very good man. If you're willing to go to the extents in which this man did, just for glory and power, it's just horrendous. But he would torture Guy Fawkes for days on end, until he gave up the conspirators, or at least until he confessed to everything that he did. And the way that this man would torture him is that he would put him on the rack. And if you don't know what the rack is, Google it and just look at the torture method. Don't even watch how they did it. Just look at the machine itself. You'll see it as a table with ropes that connect to your arms and legs, and it looks like it just stretches you out. Well, what it really is doing is just trying to separate your joints out of the socket. So it looks like you're just hanging there, you're just being held, straight up. But what it's doing is that the more that they pull on this wheel that it's on the side of it, the more it stretches your arms and legs. And the more it stretches it, eventually you're going to hear a pop. And that pop is your shoulder and your legs popping out of its socket. They would beat him, they would quarter him, any number of things to get this confession. And when they did get this confession, and you can look this up too, you can look at how they wrote the confession out for Guy Fawkes and look at Guy Fawkes' signature. It is barely even legible. Like, that is how much pain this man was in. And it didn't even look like it was his handwriting, but it looked like he just kind of scribbled it. In his confession, he'd give up all of the conspirators. And on November the 8th, 1605, in the hiding spot in which these conspirators were at least 6 of them would be killed, because Cecile he already knew where they were at. So getting the confession from Guy Fawkes was just for him having fun. It was very sick, but yeah. He sent about 100 men of arms, and men of arms are the type of soldier in which had a halberd at the end of their. It's like a giant axe, and it's a three-pointed axe at the end of a spearhead. So these men were very elite soldiers, and you had some riflemen. So when the conspirators knew that this was going to happen, they tried to actually raise an army. They sent out letters to the Pope. The Pope refused. They sent out letters to Spain. Spain refused. They sent out letters everywhere to call a Catholic uprising, and they could only muster about 46 men. And even then, those men kind of were defeated as well in a later battle. But the main 16 conspirators, at least 6 to 8 of them were killed on that same day in November the 8th, 1605. The rest were captured and sent to prison. They awaited for their trial on January 27th, 1606, and it was just a formality. It was just to tell the people on who these men were and what they plotted and what was going to happen. And of course, they sent them to be hanged, quartered, and drawn in public. On January 31st, 1606, these executions would be carried out, and they made an example of all these men. Now, to be hanged, quartered, and drawn, it's very sick, especially if you're doing it as a public setting. Guy Fawkes actually saved himself from all this, especially from the beating that he took months prior. He would just jump off the ladder of the scaffold. Right when they were taking him up to be hung, Guy Fawkes would actually jump from the top of this ladder. And I think it's about at least a 15-20 foot drop. So it would possibly kill you. And that's exactly what it did. He jumped and it broke his neck on the fall. And he saved himself from being tortured anymore than what needed to be done. Now, if you don't know what quartering and being drawn is, it's very, very brutal of death. To be hanged, quartered, and drawn, it was only given to people who were convicted of high treason, which all these men were convicted of. To be drawn is basically to be dragged through the streets and by a horse. Like you are tied by the feet or by the head, however they wanted to place you. Your hands were tied behind you, and you were drawn from where you were placed in prison all the way to your execution in front of everybody. And everybody would see you. They would see how you were being drawn. They would throw things at you, whatever they wanted to do, spit at you, whatever. To be hanged is literally to be on the gallows and hanged. And you're basically going to be hung there for if your neck snaps or you just choke to death. But you're normally hanging there for a good minute while everybody looks at you, throws things at you. Hell, and they could stab you. They could burn you alive if need be, if they wanted to. But no matter what, it was the quartering that if you didn't die to the first two, the quartering would do it for you. And quartering is really just, they tie all your limbs to 4 different horses, 5 if need be, and they would, very sick, they would tie each of your limbs to a horse, and they would tell those horses, and they would run in all four different directions too. They wouldn't just run in one direction. It's all four different directions. And all they would do is just tie your limbs to a horse and just tell the horse to go, and pop goes your limbs. And after that, they'd behead you. And then they would parade your body around the streets to let it be known that this is what a traitor of England, this is what happens to traitors in England. It was a brutal torture, and it was a brutal execution, and it's crazy that people were there to watch this. I mean, I had to listen to Dan Carlin's episode on that, on how that was just what people did back in the day. You know, you really didn't have many theater I mean, if you were poor, you couldn't go and get tickets to the theater. Hell, you didn't even know if your town had one. The story times where people would tell folk tales in order for you to get some type of entertainment, or if you had a town that had books, and if you knew how to read, that's another way of entertaining yourself. Or you just go fishing or do other things like that. But in the inner cities, that was probably one of the only sources of entertainment that you would get. And it's very sick, but the way that Dan Carlin explains it, it makes more sense. You're like, oh, okay, I guess. But yeah, people back in the day watching executions, I mean, that's what y'all did when y'all were bored. Man, I'm really happy I live now where I can at least play games or, study. In 1606, the Thanksgiving Act, or the Guy Fawkes Day, was established and is still celebrated to this day. Now, the question you always have to ask yourself is, was this plot orchestrated by Robert Cecil to keep the public from converting back or to advance his political career? Whatever the case is, did not help the Catholic people from being persecuted. It did not help anything at all. Soon, most of the Catholics in the country would have to move somewhere else. They either moved to Flanders or another place that was a safe haven for the Catholics. No matter how you slice it, no matter how you look at it, the people of England were divided. And Parliament didn't give two shits if they were divided or not. They only cared about their own interests, their own agendas, and their own self-values. And it's just sickening. You're going to allow people to do this under your own rule. And for what? King James, to be honest with you, he had nothing to do with whatever King Henry's problem with the Catholic Church was. Hell, they weren't even asking you to stay Catholic. They were asking you to stop persecuting their people. At least give them a chance, or at least give them, the right to practice their own religion. It's almost like the government plotted this the English government plotted this to keep people from converting back, keep people from doing what they were wanting to do, being subordinate to the king, even though that it was wrong. It's crazy to see that the people were easily ready to turn on each other because of what your king said to do. It's almost like today, where you could have a difference of opinion, or two people could be on two opposite sides of the political spectrum, and it can't just be a unity or balance. It always has to be, my side has to be right, your side is wrong. It's almost like you're picking a winning side, and it shouldn't be that way. It should be more of, let's see where we can find a compromise. Let's see where we can coexist peacefully together no matter what our differences are. I think if you're that person who still celebrates Guy Fawkes Day, I think you should really second guess on why you're celebrating it. And make sure that you're getting the whole story and the whole truth, and not just half of it. Because when you only get half of the story, that is where you get misinformation and you have intolerance reign when it shouldn't. I think right now, the way that this COVID is going and the way that the political spectrum is going, I think we need to stop looking at it from left and right. And I think we need to start taking a bigger standpoint. Because I guarantee you, if the people would have looked at how they were really mistreating the Catholic people during this time, I highly doubt that there would have been a treason and plot, and I highly doubt Guy Fawkes would have tried to blow up Parliament. I think with the time, or at least in that time, what the people needed was just hope. Hope for change for the future, just like we need it right now. Instead of proving who's right or who's wrong, how about we just come together and hope that when we do that, we can probably prevent another gunpowder, treason, and plot. Remember, remember, the 5th of November, the Gunpowder Treason and Plot. There should be no reason that the Gunpowder Treason should ever be forgot. And it will never be forgotten in history. But hopefully in this story, or at least in this truth, I enlighten you a little bit more. This has been Fireside Stories with the HighHistorian, signing out.